Free Period is a podcast of First Baptist Watauga Student Ministry. For more information about First Baptist Watauga, you can check us out at fbcwatauga.org. Hello and welcome to Free Period, the weekly break you want to take. I'm your host, Kevin Skinner, Associate Pastor and Student Pastor at First Baptist Church in Watauga, Texas.
And I'm Nathan McKendry, Young Adult Minister and Assistant Student Minister at First Baptist Church in Watauga, Texas. And today we are going to be answering the question, who is your good-looking intern? But before we get to that, I'm going to give Kevin another word or phrase that students today are saying, and we are going to see if he knows what it means or not. And you did really well with that word Gucci last week.
Yeah, I was...
You did rather Gucci.
Thank you. I surprised myself last week, and I was very happy that you gave me a word that I knew, although I had not really used that word before last week. I did know that word, and so just like I said last week, I began to throw that into conversation, but also in our GroupMe conversation with our students, some of those that listen to the podcast, they began to throw that word out there. And so it was a lot of fun being able to interact with some of the students that had listened to the podcast. So so let's find out what word or phrase you have for me this week so that I can see if I know it. And then, I want to throw that into the conversation this week.
All right. Well, the word this week I have for you, I actually found myself using, and I think it's just because I heard other people using it and by context figured it out. So I'm curious to see if you even know this word.
Okay.
Or if perhaps it's not that surprising. But here is the word. Oof.
Oof. I mean, I'm going to guess that it's just a mistake. Oof, like a blunder.
Use it in a sentence the way you think.
Is there a sentence? I would just say, oof.
Okay.
Like I messed up. Oof.
Okay, fair. So I think he's got it. Oftentimes I hear it as in almost like a word of condolence to another student. So say another student comes in, man, I was caught cheating on that test, and the teacher gave me a 0. The other student, who does not necessarily care a lot, goes, oof, or even big oof. So
like,
I would say
like
you almost got it.
It's kind of like
right, kind of like an oops, except that someone else can say it, not just you.
Okay.
So maybe we'll give this one to you. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt here.
Okay. Well, thanks. I mean, if I'm wrong, oof.
And now you're right.
Yes. All right, so I'm going to try and work oof into the conversation this week with the students.
All right.
And students, hey, if you've already listened to this podcast before I work it into the conversation, you work it into the conversation. You can put that in the GroupMe, or you can say oof to me in person.
But only if something goes poorly.
Well, yeah. I mean, we got to use it in the right context.
You made a great grade on that test. Oof.
No, that's wrong.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get to our question for today. Who is your good-looking intern?
Okay, and that's a great question that we will answer. But before I answer that question, first I want to say that this is a real question from the question box. So what we have on Wednesday nights at our midweek service when all the students are here is we've got a table out with sign-up sheets, and then on that table I also have a little black mailbox with some sheets of paper and a pen that you can write questions that you can submit for us to answer. So a couple of weeks after I had put that mailbox out on the table, there hadn't been much traction yet with students asking questions. And, honestly, there's still not much traction with students. Oof, yes. That mailbox is a oof. Good job. But we do hope that you will ask a question and put that in the box. But a couple of weeks after, there was a card in the box, and I was super excited. I was like, yes, we got our first question. And I unlocked the mailbox, and I pulled out that card, and I saw that question, who is your good-looking intern? So before I answer this question, let me first ask you, Nathan, who submitted that question to me?
I do not know. I didn't see anyone submit a question. Well, at the time, I think it's possible the intern submitted that question.
The intern. And who was my intern at that time?
You know, I'm going to have to confess that one was me.
So the answer to the question is really a simple answer because you were my intern at that time. Now, since that time, if I am answering that question today, I don't have an intern, right? Because since that time, you have come onto staff as our young adult minister and as our assistant student minister. And so I don't have an intern anymore, but I thought this would be a good chance. Well, first off, I never planned on answering this question. When I read it, I knew that you were the one that submitted that question. And so I jokingly, I read the question to the students the next week. I told them that you had submitted that just so that they could laugh and enjoy the question as much as I did. And they kind of begged me in that moment to actually do a podcast to answer that question.
Aw.
Yeah. So,
that's so
I
Gucci.
thought, oof. I don't know. So I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to sit down with you and for us to kind of get to know you a little bit better. So why don't we start like this, since you were the good-looking intern at the time, according to yourself.
Fair.
Why don't you start by just telling us all a little bit about yourself?
All right. Hopefully, most of you out there know me. Nathan. That's my name.
Oof.
So, yeah, I've been going to Watauga for a long time. And so I just kind of grew up here in the church and went off to college a few years ago when I graduated high school in 2016. Went off to Hart-Simmons and got my undergrad degree in ministry. Mm-hmm. And then I started seminary, which has just been this last semester here that I started seminary and graduated from my undergrad. So I've also been the youth intern here for the last 3 summers in a row, basically ever since I stopped being a youth. Zach at the time let me come on and be his summer intern when I was home from college, and then you let me do it this last summer, when y'all transitioned.
So you were interns with Zach for 2 years?
Correct.
Okay.
2 summers.
And then you were my intern for 1 year.
Correct. 1 summer. And now I'm nobody's intern. I'm an intern no more.
That's right. You have an official non-intern status.
Right. Well, and of course, I tried to ditch the intern title this past summer even. I changed my title and even took one of your business cards and made it my own. Assistant to the student pastor.
Yes.
And now I'm the assistant.
Before you were even an intern, you felt this calling to ministry. So why don't you tell us a little bit about when and how you felt called to ministry and maybe when you surrendered to that calling?
Good question. So I really, I began to start my relationship with Christ at a fairly young age. And so as I grew up in this church and with my own family, Christianity was very important. Church was very important. And so it just kind of, I think looking back, it was just a logical, reasonable response at a young age to think, well, why don't I just do that job? If I'm supposed to be telling other people about Jesus, then let's just do the job that does that. It would make it easier, right? So that's kind of what I took off as. And as I got later into the high school is really when I started hearing that word calling used more. And so I had to kind of wrestle with that language and whether or not I was just going to be a pastor or a minister because I was called to it or because I had just always said I was going to do it. And so I had to really wrestle with that calling and at that point started taking counsel from people like Paul Michael and Zach and Dennis even. And through that struggle, I kind of discerned that, no, I do think this is what I'm called to do. I do think this is where I'm wanting to be. I think God put a desire in my heart there purposely so that I would go and do this. And so, it can be really tricky to figure out what we mean when we say calling. And some people mean different things. But I think overall, I ended up surrendering to that calling and that vocation as a calling. Right. Basically senior year of high school. And then from there, I was able to just proceed in the next steps. So.
Okay. So you felt called somewhat young to ministry.
Right.
When did you give your life to Christ?
Oh, I think I was about 7 or 8 years old.
Okay.
So
okay.
pretty young.
So, yeah. So you were in the children's ministry.
That's right.
Were you here at First Baptist Watauga or another church at the time?
It's possible we had started attending here. I know I was not baptized here. I think because we had just transitioned from another church, specifically from another pastor my parents were good friends with. We went back there to be baptized, although we were members here shortly thereafter. Like I said, I may have even been a member here when I accepted Christ. It just was not baptized here.
So, Paul Michael, he was your youth pastor for most of your time in youth, or all of it?
Almost all of it. My senior year, going into my senior year, he actually was called to another church, and so he transitioned out.
Okay. So what role would you say then did First Baptist Watauga play in helping you develop your calling?
Probably the most vital role, I think. See, as I started to wrestle with that calling and affirmed it in high school, like we talked about before, part of the affirming it was talking to Dennis, our pastor. Right. As I talked to him, he really kind of encouraged me. He was kind of that voice that really affirmed it. Look, Nathan, I think you are called to ministry, right? They were all everyone I talked to was trying to be real careful not to tell me what to do, because it's important not to push someone into ministry if they need to discern for themselves if they're called. But,
absolutely.
As I was thinking, I think I'm called. He was kind of that first voice to say, "Look, I think you are. I think you need to go for it." And so I did, and never been happier for it. And then Paul Michael was willing to affirm that into me and to start kind of preparing me. Gave me a book, and he started meeting with me. Kind of discipling me a little bit. And then when he left, Zach was very intentional to just immediately pick that up. Almost immediately after he took over, he started meeting with me on a weekly basis, training me, discipling me, teaching me how to preach even. And so a lot of my preaching style, I think, even comes partly from him and the way he trained me. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as, he transitioned out, and he also did a good job at making me feel a part of the youth ministry and a part of what was happening, because he was open with me. And so when he knew that he was about to transition out, he pulled me aside just himself and told me that at youth camp. And then of course you came back into the story, and that was a lot of fun for me, because my secret hope when he was moving out was, well, maybe this means Kevin will take over, Kevin can train me, which I was really excited about when you did take it. And we kind of talked about that and about how if you would take it, then maybe I would intern again. Right. Which was, again, great for me. And then I got a lot of really good practical experience as you began to raise me up and teach me all kind of the in and outs of the ministry and the setting up. And you even let me into your vision. As soon as you transitioned in, you sent me a huge document about all the stuff that he wants to do and what he wants to see, and talk about how he would have to be flexible and change some things as needed. And that, and of course change was hard at first. Oof. Yes. But we got through it, and again, you've just been willing to let me in. And the church went, and they licensed me to ministry, I think, and when I had not even graduated high school yet. And so First Baptist Watauga played a very vital role, and church can do that. Church is meant to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I have loved about being here at this church in particular, about being on staff at this church, is that this church, as a whole, but then also that really all of the staff members that we have had has had a passion and a desire to raise people up as disciples, whether we're talking about just followers of Christ and being faithful in our walk, or if we're talking about developing young ministers into and bringing them up into the ministry and giving them opportunities to serve. First Baptist Watauga has a heart and a vision for that, and so I would simply say, if you feel like maybe you're called to ministry, if maybe it's something you're wrestling with, maybe you haven't fully surrendered to that call yet, maybe you've got some questions, feel free to talk to Nathan, feel free to talk to me, because that's our desire, that we would help to equip you as a believer and equip you as someone that is called to ministry, if that's what you are called to do. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself, Nathan, for letting us get to know you a little bit better so we could answer that question, who is your good-looking intern? Join us again next week, because that's it for this episode of Free Period. Join us again next week as we answer the question, what is the story behind Gospel Greg?
Gasp.
I hope that you enjoyed today's podcast, and I'd love to meet you in person. If you're a student between 7th and 12th grade, you can join us on Wednesday nights for midweek at First Baptist Watauga. You can also join us on Sunday mornings at 9:30 a.m. for growth groups and 10:50 a.m. for worship.